He made only 3 films, and his entire Hollywood career lasted 17 months. He was 24 years old when he died. 70 years later, his face still hangs on bedroom posters around the world, and his name still means a certain kind of American cool. His estate earns millions of dollars every year off the image of a young man who never lived to see 2 of his own movies released. The question that hangs over the whole story is the simplest one of all. How does 17 months become a legend? The answer starts on a railroad platform in Santa Monica, California, in the summer of 1940. A 9-year-old boy named James Dean was boarding a train heading east to Indiana. His mother, Mildred, had just died of uterine cancer. His father, Winton, a dental technician who had never quite known what to do with a sensitive, artistic child, was staying behind in California. The train carried the boy east, and it also carried his mother's coffin in a separate car. He made the journey alone with his grandmother, Emma Dean. The family waiting for him in Fairmount, Indiana, were good people. His Aunt Hortense and Uncle Marcus Winslow were Quaker farmers, quiet, hardworking, and kind, and they gave him what they could: a bedroom, chores, a steady routine. What they could not give him was an explanation. His father stayed in California, remarried, and built a separate life. The distance between Winton and James would stretch across the rest of Dean's short years. It would come out in fights about college, about acting, about every choice the son made that the father couldn't understand. Years later, in a high school assignment, Dean wrote about his mother in the simplest words he could find. "Mom became ill and passed out of my life at the age of 9, he wrote. "I never knew the reason for Mom's death. In fact, it still preys on my mind." That last line would echo through everything he ever did in front of a camera. Fairmount in the 1940s was quiet and slow, the kind of small Indiana town where everyone knew everyone, and the calendar was built around harvests and church. Dean made the varsity basketball team and won speech competitions through the Indiana High School Forensic Association, and he performed in every play the drama department would let him near. On stage, the grief had somewhere to go. He could pour it into a character and use it there. Off the stage, he didn't know what to do with it. Performing was the one thing that helped. His aunt saw it and pushed him forward. A local pastor named James DeWeerd took an interest too. DeWeerd introduced him to bullfighting, car racing, and theater. Those 3 things would shape the rest of his life in ways nobody in Fairmount could have predicted. By the time Dean graduated high school in the spring of 1949, he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He moved back to California to study drama, dropped out of UCLA within a year, and made a decision he wasn't going to take back. He was going to be an actor, and he was going to start right away. He arrived in New York in 1951 with almost nothing. A small allowance, a few contacts, and the kind of certainty that only works if you're either right or too young to know better. He bartended in the theater district to pay his rent, did television commercials, and took small stage roles wherever he could find them. Gradually, he began spending time around the Actors Studio on West 44th Street. It was Lee Strasberg's school, the same place Marlon Brando had trained. The serious young actors of the day came there to learn a method that asked them to dig into their own lives, their own memories, and put what they found into the character. Dean took to it completely. He had more raw material than most people his age, and he knew exactly where to find it. He wrote back to his family in Fairmount about it. "It is the greatest school of the theater," he told them. "I have made great strides in my craft." The pride in those words was real, and there was something else underneath them. A young man telling the people who raised him that the thing they had encouraged was turning into something serious. Broadway came next, with a small role in The Immoralist in 1954 that earned him real attention. Then he walked off the production 2 weeks in because of a movie. Across town, Elia Kazan was casting East of Eden and was looking, in his own words, for another Brando. Kazan's first instinct for the role of Cal Trask had actually been Brando himself, with Montgomery Clift as the brother Aaron. Both were ruled out for the same reason. At 30 and 34 years old, neither one could believably play a teenager. The search narrowed. Paul Newman, young and technically accomplished, came in to read for Cal. Dean read for Cal as well. The two of them ended up testing together, on the same camera, reading the parts of the rival brothers opposite each other. The footage from that afternoon is one of the great pieces of Hollywood history. 2 future legends in a single frame, both unknown, both nervous, with the part still up for grabs. Newman didn't get any role in East of Eden. Dean signed with Warner Brothers, packed up his life, and drove west to begin filming at 23 years old. He was carrying every train ride, every unanswered question, and every quiet night in that Fairmount farmhouse directly into Kazan's camera. He just didn't know it yet. East of Eden opened on the 9th of March, 1955, and something happened in theaters across the country that nobody had quite anticipated. The moment Dean appeared on screen, girls in the audience began to scream, and they didn't stop. It was the kind of reaction an audience has when it sees something it has never seen before. The performance was physically contorted and emotionally raw, the work of a man barely holding back something that had been building inside him for years. And it really had been building for years. Kazan had encouraged Dean to draw on his relationship with his own father for the scenes between Cal and his father in the film, Adam Trask. The longing, the rejection, the constant need for an approval that never quite arrives. Raymond Massey, who played the father, admitted later that he found Dean's intensity unsettling. That discomfort comes through in every scene the two of them share. An Oscar nomination came in for his first film. Variety called it the highest-grossing picture of the month. Warner Brothers understood at once what they had signed. Within weeks of East of Eden's release, he was on set for the next one. Rebel Without a Cause put him in front of director Nicholas Ray in the role of Jim Stark, a troubled teenager in a red windbreaker, lashing out at parents who couldn't reach him and friends who couldn't keep up. The film shot through the late spring of 1955. The red jacket would go on to become the most recognizable piece of clothing in his entire career. Then came Giant, the biggest production of the three. Director George Stevens cast him opposite Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor in a sweeping Texas story about a ranch hand named Jet Rink, who strikes oil and turns into a bitter, wealthy man. The role asked him to age 40 years on screen, to play someone older and harder than the boy he had played for Kazan. He spent the summer of 1955 in West Texas, working on the accent, the walk, and the slow burn of a character built to carry a 3-hour film. Dean made some money and bought a Porsche. He entered road races in Palm Springs and Bakersfield, and he finished well enough to be taken seriously by the people who took racing seriously. Racing gave him the same thing acting did, a complete focus on the present, where nothing else existed. During production on Giant that summer, the studio formally barred him from racing, and he complied. He finished his final scenes in September 1955, and the ban was lifted. He entered a race in Salinas and bought a new car for the run, a Porsche 550 Spider, silver, low to the ground, with the words "Little Bastard" painted in red across the hood. On the evening of the 23rd of September, 1955, Dean was outside a restaurant in Los Angeles when he ran into the British actor Alec Guinness, who was in town filming The Swan. Dean was proud of the little bastard and wanted to show it off. Guinness looked at the car and felt something he could never quite put into words afterward, a sense of wrongness, a feeling that the car was going to do something terrible. He pulled Dean aside. The words he chose, recorded later in his diary and on a 1977 episode of The Parkinson Show, were exact. "Please, never get in it," Guinness said. "If you get in that car, you will be found dead." Dean laughed. He was 24 years old, newly famous, and in possession of the fastest car he had ever owned. So he thanked Guinness for the concern and changed the subject. There was another warning that came from a very different source, Dean himself. On the 17th of September, 1955, 13 days before the crash, he sat in front of a camera and filmed the public service announcement for the National Highway Safety Committee. He was relaxed, charming, entirely himself in the footage. When his co-presenter asked if he had any advice for young drivers, he looked directly into the lens. "Take it easy driving," he said. "The life you save may be mine." He filmed the spot, drove home, and within the week, he was on the road to Salinas. The morning of the 30th of September, 1955, Dean and his Porsche mechanic Rolf Vutherick left Hollywood in the Little Bastard, heading north. A photographer named Sanford Roth followed behind in a separate car, planning a photo essay on Dean at the races. The day was bright and the road was open, and Dean was in good spirits. At 3:30 in the afternoon, a highway patrol officer pulled the Little Bastard over near Bakersfield and wrote Dean a ticket for doing 65 in a 55 zone. Dean took the citation, tucked it away, and drove on. He stopped at a diner around 4:45, ordered a Coke, stretched his legs, and got back behind the wheel. At 5:45 in the evening, the road narrowed toward the junction of Route 46 and Route 41 near a small town called Cholame. A 1950 Ford Tudor traveling in the opposite direction began a left turn across the highway. The driver was a 23-year-old college student named Donald Turnipseed, heading home for the weekend. The setting sun was directly in his eyes. The little bastard was silver, low to the ground and moving fast, and Turnipseed never saw it. Dean saw Turnipseed. His last words to Vutherick were steady and certain. "That guy's gotta stop," he said. "He'll see us." The cars met almost head-on. Vutherick was thrown clear and survived with serious injuries. Turnipseed walked away with cuts and bruising. James Dean was pulled from the wreckage and rushed to Paso Robles War Memorial Hospital, 28 miles from the crash site, where he was pronounced dead on arrival shortly after 6 in the evening. He was 24 years old. Rebel Without a Cause opened in New York 22 days later. Giant followed the year after that. What happened next moved faster than anyone could have planned or contained. 3,000 people came to his funeral in Fairmount, Indiana, more than the entire population of the town. Warner Brothers began receiving more mail addressed to a dead actor than they had ever received for a living one. Rebel Without a Cause came out just weeks after the crash, and it landed on an entire generation of young people. They saw in Jim Stark, restless, misunderstood, desperate for something he could not name, exactly what they felt about themselves but couldn't put into words. The film did more than make James Dean a star. It made him a symbol, and symbols, unlike stars, do not age. Giant arrived the following year and brought with it a second Academy Award nomination after his death. Dean became the only actor in Hollywood history to receive 2 posthumous nominations. Over the next decade, the image hardened into a single recognizable silhouette: the red jacket from Rebel, the jeans, the way he stood with his shoulders forward and his hands jammed in his pockets, as if bracing for something that had not yet arrived. Ace Comb saw its sales soar after a single scene of Dean running a comb through his hair on screen. Converse paid $50,000 to license a photograph of him and watched its sneaker sales jump by close to half. His estate, eventually managed by CMG Worldwide, has earned millions in licensing fees every year for decades. In 2015, Forbes named him the single highest-earning dead celebrity on the planet. Humphrey Bogart watched the myth grow in real time and said what other people in Hollywood were thinking. "Dean died at just the right time," Bogart said. "He left behind a legend." So how does 17 months become a legend? Part of it is timing. He died before anyone had the chance to be disappointed by him. He never made a bad film, never lived through a difficult decade, and never faded into the ordinary. Nothing chipped away at what those first 3 pictures had built. Part of it is tragedy, because the culture has always been pulled toward the unfinished and the question of what might have been. But timing and tragedy alone have produced dozens of young Hollywood deaths that nobody remembers with anything like the same intensity. The real answer is something the audiences themselves understood the first time they saw him. James Dean was the first young actor who looked genuinely young on a movie screen. He was a boy still becoming someone, still in pain, still working things out, still carrying inside him the 9-year-old on a train with a coffin and a father who had stayed behind. The audiences watching his films in 1955 were teenagers themselves. What they saw on screen felt true in a way almost nothing else in popular culture had managed to feel. He wasn't performing for them. He was right in front of them, unfinished and unguarded. And that quality was the one thing that could never be manufactured and never repeated. 3 films in 17 months. A boy who had found on a stage what he couldn't find anywhere else, and who spent the rest of his short life chasing that same feeling. In every fast car, in every difficult scene, in every moment where the present was so big, nothing else existed. That, in the end, was all a legend ever needed. If this story moved you, you're in the right place. Offscript publishes new documentaries every week. The real stories behind the names you grew up watching. Subscribe so you never miss the next one, and drop a comment below. We'd love to know what part of James Dean's story surprised you most. We'll see you in the next one.